It was a warm Friday evening in Atlanta, and the city lights were just starting to flicker to life. The streets buzzed softly with the hum of traffic, laughter from people heading out for dinner, and the occasional rhythm of music from open-car windows. For Special Agent Maya Jefferson, it was one of those rare evenings when she finally got to breathe. She had wrapped up a long week at the bureau, paperwork, interviews, and meetings that stretched late into the night. Tonight, she just wanted peace. She wasn't dressed like an FBI agent. She wore jeans, a simple blouse, and her hair tied back. Her badge and firearm were in her purse, tucked away beside her on the passenger seat. She drove her black sedan through the quiet side streets, heading toward home, thinking about calling her mother later or maybe ordering some takeout. As she slowed at a red light, she caught sight of a patrol car in her rearview mirror. It wasn't unusual. Police cars were common around this area. Still, something about how the cruiser lingered behind her made her uneasy. When the light turned green, she eased forward. The cruiser followed. A few blocks later, its lights flashed. Blue and red reflections flickered across her dashboard. Maya's stomach tightened, but she kept her hands on the wheel. She wasn't speeding, and her license and registration were perfectly valid. Maybe it was just a random stop. She pulled into a well-lit parking lot in front of a closed hardware store. The police car stopped behind her. A tall, broad man stepped out, adjusting his belt as he approached. His nameplate read, Mullins. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between stern and suspicious. "Evening," he said, his flashlight shining briefly across her face. "License and registration." "Of course, officer," Maya said politely. She kept her voice calm. "May I ask why I was stopped?" "You made an improper lane change back there," he replied. "I see, I didn't realize that," she said softly. "Let me grab my license." She moved slowly, making sure both hands stayed visible. She had done enough field interviews with local police to know that clear communication mattered. She reached into her purse, careful and deliberate. The officer shifted slightly, his hand brushing near his holster. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he said sharply. "They are," Maya said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm just getting my wallet. It's right here." There was something tense in the air now, something unnecessary, she thought. She had seen this kind of tension before, when fear met assumption. But she stayed calm, her movements smooth and clear. She handed over her license and registration. He looked them over, shining his flashlight again into the car. "You live around here?" "Yes, a few miles north," she answered. "What brings you out tonight?" "Heading home from work," she said simply. He squinted. "This time of night?" Maya offered a polite half-smile. "It's been a long week." There was a long pause. The officer stared at her as though trying to fit her into a story that made sense to him. He seemed dissatisfied, maybe even irritated by her calmness. "Stay in the vehicle," he said suddenly, walking back toward his car. She exhaled slowly, resting her hands on the steering wheel again. She had nothing to hide, but she couldn't shake the heavy feeling that this stop wasn't about a lane change. She glanced at the dash cam in his cruiser reflecting faintly in her mirror, and hoped it was recording everything clearly. A few minutes passed. Then he came back, his posture stiff, his expression hard. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Maya blinked, surprised. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Just step out," he said, his hand again hovering near his sidearm. She hesitated for half a second. As an FBI agent, she had trained for de-escalation for moments like this. But tonight she wasn't in uniform. She was just another person on the street. "All right," she said calmly, opening the door slowly. She stepped out, her palms open and visible. "Turn around," he said. "Sir, could you please tell me why—" "Just turn around," he snapped. She turned, facing her car, her heart pounding now. The air felt too still. "Do you have any weapons on you?" he asked. "No," she said. "I don't." "Are you sure?" "Yes." He seemed unconvinced. "You looked nervous when you reached into your bag." "I was reaching for my license," she said softly. He took a step closer. "You were acting suspicious." Maya turned her head slightly. "Officer, with all due respect, I'm cooperating fully." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Somewhere down the block, another car's headlights flashed past. The sound startled him. His hand twitched. The moment stretched thin. Too thin. He shouted something she didn't quite catch, then everything blurred for a second. She heard a loud crack, a gunshot, and felt a sharp sting across her shoulder. The sound rang in her ears. Her breath caught. She stumbled sideways, gripping her arm. The pain was sharp but not deep. She looked down, just a graze. Thank God. The officer froze, his eyes wide as though even he couldn't believe what had happened. Don't move, he barked, his gun still raised. Maya held her other hand high. I'm not moving, she said calmly, though her heart hammered in her chest. But you need to lower your weapon. She reached slowly for her purse with her uninjured arm. I'm reaching for my identification, she said clearly. I am a federal agent. Stop, he yelled again, though there was hesitation in his voice now. She ignored it, moving with deliberate care. From her purse, she pulled out her leather badge wallet and flipped it open, holding it high enough for him to see. Federal Bureau of Investigation, she said evenly. Special Agent Maya Jefferson. The world went silent for a moment. The officer's face changed instantly, from authority to disbelief, then panic. Wait. What? He muttered, stepping back. Call your supervisor, she said firmly. Now. Her voice carried the calm command of someone who'd spent years dealing with tense rooms. The officer stumbled backward toward his radio, calling for backup. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Their lights painted the parking lot in flashes of red and blue. The new officers rushed in, weapons drawn, until one of them recognized the badge in Maya's raised hand. Hold on, everyone, one officer shouted. She's FBI. They lowered their guns. Maya exhaled, lowering her arms. The sting in her shoulder throbbed, but she stood tall. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just looked at the officer who had fired. His face had gone pale. An ambulance was called. While the paramedics checked her wound, she stayed quiet, answering only the necessary questions. It was just a graze, the medic said. No serious damage. But the emotional weight in the air was heavy. Her colleagues from the bureau arrived soon after, notified through local dispatch. They spoke briefly with the police sergeant on scene, whose tone was suddenly filled with excuses. He claimed he saw a weapon or thought she was reaching for something dangerous. But there had been nothing in her hands except her license and later her badge. The senior agent on scene, a calm, older man, looked at Maya with concern. You all right? I'll be fine, she said. But I want every second of that footage pulled, every second. He nodded. Already working on it. The parking lot stayed lit for hours as investigators and supervisors reviewed the scene. Reporters began to gather near the police tape, drawn by the flashing lights. Someone whispered that the woman shot was an FBI agent, and that was enough to set phones buzzing all across the city. Maya sat on the edge of the ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, though she wasn't cold. She stared at the patrol cars and thought about how quickly everything had happened, how a quiet drive home had turned into something she'd only read about in reports. She knew what tomorrow would bring. Headlines, statements, maybe even protests. But for now, she just sat there, steady and silent, watching the night unfold. A young officer approached, holding her purse. Ma'am, we found this near your seat. Thank you, she said. He hesitated, then added softly, I'm sorry for what happened. She met his eyes, not with anger, but with something deeper. Sadness, maybe. Or exhaustion. Just make sure the truth comes out, she said. As the last of the flashing lights began to fade into the distance, Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a dull ache in her shoulder and a storm in her thoughts. She had survived worse in the field, armed suspects, dangerous missions, but this felt different. This was supposed to be home. She leaned back against the cool metal of the ambulance, the hum of the city soft around her. Somewhere out there, she thought, people were laughing, eating, living. Life went on even when yours paused for a moment. She closed her eyes for a second, replaying the night in her head, the flashing lights, the fear, the shot, the silence after. She didn't want revenge. She wanted accountability. She wanted change. As the ambulance doors closed behind her and the siren began to wail softly, she whispered under her breath, "No more hiding. Not this time." The days following the shooting felt like a blur with emotions spinning in every direction. The news hit fast and hard. Maya never imagined that a routine traffic stop would escalate into something so huge. Now, her face was on every news channel, her name in every headline. The shooting had sparked a wave of protests, anger, and public outcry, but it also opened the door to something deeper, an investigation that could shake the foundations of the police department. Within the first few hours, the city began to feel the pressure. Citizens demanded answers. The police department was in crisis mode, trying to manage the fallout. Meanwhile, Maya, though still recovering from the graze on her shoulder, was thrown headfirst in. Maya sat in the FBI office staring at the video replay over and over again. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional beep of a phone. Agents around her were reviewing the same footage, taking notes, making calls, and preparing for what would come next. This was the kind of work that no one liked to do, but everyone knew it had to be done. "I don't get it," one of her colleagues, an analyst, said softly, pausing the video. "He had no reason to pull a weapon." Maya shook her head, rubbing her temples. It wasn't just about the weapon. It was about his assumptions. He saw a black woman in a car, and that's all he saw. Everything after that was just him justifying his fear. The room fell silent. The weight of what she said hung in the air. "What's the plan, then?" another agent asked, breaking the silence. "We go public with this?" "Not yet," Maya answered, her voice calm but firm. "We need to make sure we've covered every angle. If we rush this, they'll spin it their way. We need the facts, all of them." "Are you sure you're ready for this?" the agent asked gently, knowing the pressure Maya was under. "I don't have a choice," she said softly. "This is bigger than me," that was true. As much as Maya wished she could step away and let someone else carry the burden, she knew she couldn't. This wasn't just about one bad cop. This was about a system that had allowed officers like Mullins to operate with impunity. This was about the larger fight for accountability and justice. While the investigation into Officer Mullins continued, Maya's life outside the office was beginning to unravel in unexpected ways. The protests in the streets were gaining momentum. People were angry, not just because of what had happened to Maya, but because it was just the latest in a long history of police brutality against people of color. There was an energy in the air, a sense that something was finally going to change, but no one knew exactly what that would look like yet. Maya's phone buzzed. It was a message from one of her closest friends in the department, a fellow agent she trusted implicitly. "They're trying to discredit you, Maya. Be careful. It's not just the department. It's bigger than that." She read the message again. The message wasn't unexpected, but it made the weight of the situation feel heavier. Discrediting wasn't new in situations like this, but it stung, knowing that it might come from people who were supposed to be on her side. Maya knew she had to be ready for whatever was coming next. But in that moment, she also realized that she was no longer just fighting for her own justice. She was fighting for something much bigger. Her case had become a symbol. The media had picked up on her story, and now her name was being used in headlines as a representation of the struggle against racial injustice in law enforcement. Whether she liked it or not, she had become the face of this fight. As the investigation picked up speed, Maya's colleagues began to piece together Mullins' past. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing his history became. There were complaints, multiple complaints filed against him over the years, all related to racial profiling and excessive use of force. But nothing ever stuck. In fact, the police department had repeatedly swept the complaints under the rug. Mullins had been given a pass time and time again. Maya and the rest of the team spent countless hours poring over these files, interviewing people who had been affected by Mullins' actions, and building a case that could not be ignored. They were gathering evidence that proved Mullins was not just a bad cop. He was a dangerous one. But they knew that this case wasn't just about him. It was about the system that allowed him to operate with such disregard for others. One evening, As the team sifted through yet another stack of paperwork, Maya received an unexpected call. It was from a reporter who had been covering the case. "I'm not sure how to say this," the reporter said, her voice tight with tension. "But I've found something that could change everything." Maya sat up straight, her heart quickening. "What is it?" "It's about Mullins," the reporter continued. "It's not just the complaints against him. There's something worse." Maya felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" "The video footage, there's another angle. A civilian captured something on their phone. Something that was never released. It shows Mullins before he pulled the trigger. He's shouting something. Something racial." Maya's hand tightened around the phone, the air around her thickening. "What?" The reporter hesitated. "I can't give you all the details yet. But it's bad. Really bad. You need to see it for yourself." Maya immediately arranged to meet the reporter. She didn't know what this new footage would reveal. But one thing was clear. The stakes had just gotten much higher. When Maya met with the reporter, they sat in a small cafe, far from the prying eyes of the public. The reporter handed her a tablet and played the video. The angle was different from the body cam footage. The shot had been captured from behind a parked car. Maya watched as Mullins, his voice raised, said something under his breath that she could barely make out. Then the camera zoomed in and she heard it, a racial slur. Clear as day, it was a gut punch. Her stomach twisted as she replayed the moment in her head. She had heard the anger in his voice before, but she never expected it to be so blatant. The video confirmed what she had suspected all along. Officer Mullins had acted not out of fear or training, but out of hate. For the first time since the shooting, Maya allowed herself to feel the weight of the situation. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a system that had failed countless people, allowed this kind of behavior to thrive, and silenced those who spoke up. Maya's colleagues were as shaken as she was when they saw the footage. This was more than just a bad cop. This was a betrayal of trust at every level. "We need to go public with this," one of the agents said. "This could change everything. It's the proof we've been missing." But Maya hesitated. She knew they had to be strategic. The media was already on high alert, but one wrong move could ruin the entire case. She looked at the footage one more time and then turned to her team. "We'll take it to the prosecutor first. Get their support, then we move forward." There was no turning back now. This case had escalated from a local issue to a national one. But Maya had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let Mullins or anyone like him get away with it. Not this time. The days leading up to the trial felt like a blur of legal paperwork, interviews, and endless preparation. For Maya, it was a constant cycle of briefing with her colleagues, reviewing evidence and trying to stay focused on the case at hand. She knew that the trial of Officer Mullins would be a defining moment, not just for her, but for the justice system as a whole. It was more than just a trial for one officer's actions. It was a trial for accountability, for the lives that had been lost and for the countless people who had been ignored for too long. The media coverage had only grown more intense. News outlets were constantly covering the updates, and every day there was new footage, new interviews, new angles on the story. People were glued to their screens, waiting to see what would happen next. The pressure was mounting, not just on the police department, but on everyone involved in the case. For Maya, the hardest part was knowing how much was riding on this trial. She had been thrust into the spotlight, her name spoken by strangers on the street, her face plastered across television screens. It wasn't just about being an FBI agent anymore. It was about representing something bigger than herself. It was about being the face of change, whether she liked it or not. Her colleagues had warned her that the trial would be exhausting, but nothing could prepare her for the reality of it. The courtroom was packed. Media, activists, protesters, and law enforcement all gathered together, each person eager to see the outcome. The tension in the air was thick, and every word spoken in the courtroom seemed to echo through the building. When the trial began, Maya sat in the front row, her posture straight and her eyes focused on the proceedings. She couldn't afford to let her emotions take over. This was not just about her story. It was about justice for the countless people who had suffered under the same system. She knew the trial would be long and difficult, but she was ready. The prosecution team, led by a seasoned attorney, laid out the case against Officer Mullins in a methodical and powerful way. They started with the footage, videos from the body cams and dash cams that showed the terrifying moment when Mullins fired his weapon. There was no question about what had happened. The evidence was clear. Maya had done nothing wrong. She had complied with every order, had been calm and controlled, and yet she had been shot. It was a gut-wrenching moment for everyone in the courtroom as they watched the footage, and Maya could feel the weight of it bearing down on her. But as the defense team began their argument, the tone of the trial shifted. They tried to paint a different picture of Mullins, one of a cop who had been acting in self-defense, one who had feared for his life. They played the same footage, but they tried to manipulate it, focusing on Maya's every movement, suggesting that she had somehow provoked Mullins, even though the evidence showed the exact opposite. The defense lawyers were smooth, persuasive, and calculated, doing everything they could to discredit Maya's testimony and paint her as a threat. Maya listened carefully, trying not to let the defense's words get under her skin. She knew what they were doing, but it still hurt to hear it. They weren't just attacking her. They were attacking her character, questioning her every action. They wanted the jury to believe that she was somehow responsible for what had happened. But Maya was strong. She couldn't let their lies derail the truth. The most difficult moment of the trial came when it was her turn to take the stand. She had been prepared for this, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of it all. The courtroom fell silent as she walked to the witness stand, the eyes of everyone in the room on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the pressure of being both the victim and the person who had to speak for everyone who had been wronged. She took a deep breath and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. The prosecutor asked her to recount the events of that night, the traffic stop, the shooting, and everything that had led up to it. Maya spoke carefully, her voice steady but emotional. She described the way Mullins had approached her, the way he had drawn his weapon, and how she had tried to comply despite his hostility. She explained how she had shown him her identification, how she had stayed calm, and how despite all of that he had still fired his gun. "I did everything right," Maya said, her voice low but firm. "I didn't make any sudden moves. I didn't reach for anything. I was just trying to go home. But he didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a threat because of the color of my skin." There was a heavy silence in the courtroom. Maya could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. She had never said anything like that aloud before. It was the truth, but it hurt to admit it. The prosecutor didn't ask her any more questions. The courtroom was still, everyone waiting for the next move. It was the defense attorney's turn. He stood up and walked toward her, his expression calm, almost sympathetic. He started asking her about her training as an FBI agent, her experience in high-pressure situations. He wanted to make it seem as though she had known exactly what she was doing that night, as though she had somehow provoked the officer into reacting. "Maya, isn't it true that you've been in situations like this before? That you've dealt with armed suspects, hostile environments? Aren't you trained to handle these kinds of encounters?" The defense attorney asked. Maya didn't flinch. "Yes, I am trained. But I was not in a hostile environment that night. I wasn't armed. I wasn't a threat to anyone." The defense attorney pressed further, trying to make her second-guess herself, trying to twist her words. But Maya was prepared. She didn't let him rattle her. She stuck to the truth, and eventually the defense attorney backed off, realizing that he couldn't break her. After the trial, Maya sat with her team, exhausted but relieved that her testimony was over. It had been the hardest part of the entire ordeal, but now it was behind her. The evidence was on her side. She knew the truth, and that truth couldn't be denied. The rest of the trial played out with more twists and turns. Witnesses were called to testify, experts were brought in to discuss police protocols, and the jury listened carefully to every word. But the momentum was on the prosecution's side. The truth had come out. Officer Mullins had acted out of prejudice and fear, and the evidence showed that. When it was finally time for the jury to deliberate, Maya sat in the back of the courtroom, her heart racing. She had done everything she could. Now it was in their hands. The room was quiet as everyone waited. The tension was almost unbearable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the jury returned. The foreman stood up and read the verdict. "Guilty," he said, his voice clear and firm. A wave of emotion washed over Maya. She didn't cry, but her chest tightened. It was over. Officer Mullins had been held accountable for what he had done, and justice had been served. But even in that moment of relief, Maya knew that the fight wasn't over. This was just one case, one small piece of a much larger puzzle. The system had failed too many people for too long, and there was still work to be done. But for now, Maya could take a breath. She had done what she had set out to do. She had stood up for herself, for justice, and for everyone who had ever been wronged by the system. As she left the courtroom that day, her shoulders felt a little lighter, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it was a road she was ready to walk. The aftermath of the trial was like a breath of fresh air after holding one's breath for too long. Maya stood in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the trial still lingering in the air. Even though the decision had already been made, the city had erupted in celebration when the verdict was announced. People were marching, chanting, and singing in the streets. For many, it was a rare moment of justice, a small victory against a system that had often seemed impenetrable. But for Maya, it was a bittersweet moment. While Officer Mullen's conviction was a step forward, she knew it wasn't the end of the battle. The larger fight against systemic injustice, against racial profiling, against police brutality, was far from over. This was just one case in a long line of many, each one another piece of the puzzle that needed to be solved. Maya had always known this, but now it was even clearer. The conviction of one officer wouldn't fix everything, but it could be the spark that started a fire. The next few weeks were a blur of media interviews, calls from friends, and messages of support from people she had never met. Everyone wanted to talk to her, reporters, activists, politicians, each one eager to hear her thoughts on what had happened and what should happen next. The world had taken notice, and Maya was being pulled in every direction. But through it all, she couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. She wasn't just an agent anymore. She was a symbol, a representative of something much larger than herself. In the days following the trial, Maya took some time to reflect. She went for long walks around the city, sometimes with friends, sometimes alone. The world seemed different now. She saw things more clearly, as if the veil had been lifted from her eyes. She had always known about the challenges of being a person of color in law enforcement, but the trial had exposed the ugly truth of just how deep those challenges ran. It wasn't just a few bad apples in the police force. It was a system that allowed those bad apples to thrive. But in her heart, Maya also knew that change was possible. The conviction of Officer Mullins wasn't a magic fix, but it was proof that the system could be held accountable. She had witnessed it firsthand, and that gave her hope. One afternoon, as she sat at a coffee shop, Maya received a call from one of her colleagues in the FBI. There had been a major development in another case. Another officer, this time from a neighboring city, who had been involved in a similar situation. The case was already gathering attention, and it was clear that the public was watching. They needed Maya's expertise. The trial had set a precedent, and now it seemed like the floodgates had opened. "Are you up for it?" her colleague asked. "We need someone who's been through it." Maya paused for a moment. She had just been through a long and exhausting ordeal, and part of her wanted to step back and take a break. But deep down she knew that stepping back wasn't an option. The work wasn't finished. "It couldn't be. I'm in," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." That was the moment she realized that this was her path now. It wasn't just about one case or one conviction. It was about the long-term fight. The work of holding people accountable, of fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves, was never truly done. It was a path that would be long and full of obstacles, but it was a path that Maya was willing to walk. As Maya threw herself back into the work, the support from the community continued to pour in. The streets were still alive with protests, but now the chants were different. People weren't just angry anymore, they were hopeful. There was a new sense of possibility in the air. Activists were rallying, pushing for policy changes, calling for more oversight of law enforcement. Maya's case had become a symbol, a turning point in the fight for justice. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride when she saw the progress being made. It wasn't about her, it was about the larger movement. People were coming together, demanding change and refusing to accept the status quo. For the first time in a long while, it felt like things were moving in the right direction. But Maya also knew that there would be pushback. The system that had allowed so many officers to act with impunity wasn't going to change overnight. There would be those who resisted, those who tried to preserve the old ways. Maya had seen it before. the way people in power fought to keep things the same. She had seen it in the police department, and she knew it would be the same in the larger fight for reform. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing case files, Maya got a call from a journalist who had been following her story. The reporter had been gathering information on the impact of her case on the wider movement for police reform, and she wanted to know Maya's thoughts. "It's still early," Maya said, her voice thoughtful, "but what we've seen so far is encouraging. People are standing up, speaking out. The conversation has shifted, but we've got a long way to go. We can't stop now." The journalist agreed, noting that while there had been progress, there was still a deep mistrust between communities of color and law enforcement. She asked Maya about her own experiences in the field. How had things changed for her since the trial? Maya thought for a moment. "I think the biggest change has been the recognition that we have a voice. People are listening now. I think we've proven that change is possible, but we also know it won't be easy. This fight is going to take all of us every day." After the call, Maya sat back in her chair looking out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. There was still so much work to be done, but there was also hope. People were willing to fight. They were willing to stand up for what was right, and that gave Maya the strength to keep going. As the weeks passed, Maya continued her work with the FBI, helping to build cases against corrupt officers, speaking out about the need for reform, and pushing for better training and accountability within law enforcement. She also continued to work with local activists, sharing her story and offering support to those who were still fighting for justice. But the personal toll was undeniable. Maya's life had been turned upside down by the shooting, and while the trial had been a step toward justice, it had also left scars. She had seen things that no one should ever have to see. She had felt the weight of being both a victim and a symbol, and it had taken its toll on her. But despite everything, Maya remained determined to continue the fight. For herself, for the people she had lost, and for the countless others who had been wronged by a broken system. And so, the fight continued. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Maya knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to back down. She would keep fighting, one case at a time, until the system was held accountable for the harm it had caused.